At Thanksgiving, my cousin told me he wasn't real family, and a few weeks later, he found out I inherited everything from our grandma. Now, he hasn't spoken to any of us since. At Thanksgiving, my cousin told me he wasn't real family, and a few weeks later, he found out I inherited everything from our grandma. Now, he hasn't spoken to any of us since, and honestly, I can't tell if I should feel guilty or if he finally just got what was coming to him. I'm Melissa, I'm 31, and this is the story of how one holiday dinner completely shattered what little was left of my family's peace. You have to understand that for most of my life, my grandma was more than just a grandmother. She was like a second mom to me. When my parents divorced, I was only 8. My sister Anna was 6. It was messy, ugly, the kind of divorce you hear about in soap operas. My dad left and moved across the country, and my mom was juggling 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. So Grandma stepped in. She lived only 10 minutes away from us, and it felt like she was always there. She was the one who picked us up from school, cooked us dinner when Mom had to work late, and she was the one who sat by my bed at night when I had nightmares about my dad never coming back. Anna, and I basically grew up in her house. She taught me how to ride a bike in her driveway. She baked me cookies when I failed my first math test, and she held my hand the day I graduated college. She wasn't just family, she was home. My cousin Jake, though, he was a completely different story. He's 29, 2 years younger than me, and the son of my Uncle Dave, Mom's younger brother. Dave married into money, so Jake grew up in a comfortable suburban home about 2 hours away. I can count on one hand the number of times he came to Grandma's house. She'd invite him for holidays, for birthdays, even just to spend a weekend, and he almost never showed. He always had an excuse: school, friends, sports. Even when he got older, it was always work or a girlfriend or some trip he was planning. Grandma used to sigh and say, "I wish Jake would visit more. I know he's busy, but it would be nice to hear from him." She never stopped reaching out, though. Every Christmas, she'd send him cards and little gifts. Sometimes he'd text a quick thank you, but that was it. Meanwhile, she was at every milestone in my life. She came to my high school graduation, my college ceremony, even the opening of the tiny coffee shop I worked at for a while. When I was broke after college, Grandma quietly paid off my last tuition balance so I wouldn't drown in debt. When I had nowhere to live, she let me stay in her guest room for months. When I got sick, she sat by my bedside and made me tea. She was always there. But for Jake, he didn't even call her on her birthday most years. Fast forward to last Thanksgiving. We were all at Uncle Dave's house for dinner, which was already rare. The whole family was there. Mom, Anna, Uncle Dave, Jake, his parents, and even some distant relatives we barely knew. It was one of those big, noisy family dinners where you can't even hear yourself think. I remember the table was set beautifully, with candles and this huge centerpiece of autumn leaves. Everyone was laughing, clinking glasses, passing dishes around. For a moment, it felt normal. Then, out of nowhere, Jake looks at me. He leans back in his chair, takes a sip of wine, and says, "You know, you and Anna were always Grandma's golden kids. I've never felt like I really belong in this family." The entire table went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I just stared at him, completely thrown. I didn't know what to say at first. I mean, Jake, the guy who barely showed up for anything, the guy who never even called Grandma, unless she called him first. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. That, of course, he belonged, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said the one thing that came to mind, the truth I'd been holding back for years. I looked him in the eye and said, "Well, maybe that's because you weren't around. Grandma left everything to me and Anna. Her heirlooms, her clock collection, her jewelry, all of it. She wanted it to stay with the people who were there for her." Jake froze. His face went pale, like all the color drained out at once. He set down his glass slowly, and for a moment it felt like the air got heavier. No one said a word. Even Mom just stared at me, shocked. Uncle Dave's fork clinked against his plate. Anna glanced at me wide-eyed, like she couldn't believe I'd actually said it out loud, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for someone to break the silence. And in that moment, I remembered all the reasons Grandma made that choice. When I was 19 and struggling to pay for college, she slipped me an envelope with a check, told me not to worry. When I got laid off from my first job, she let me stay at her house rent-free until I got back on my feet. When I got sick with the flu, so bad I could barely get out of bed, she brought me soup and sat with me until I felt better. She never once hesitated to help me or Anna. Meanwhile, Jake, he didn't call her for holidays. He skipped her last birthday party. She invited him to Christmas 3 years ago, and he canceled last minute because he had better plans. Grandma would smile sadly and say, "Well, at least he's busy living his life," but I could tell it hurt her. Finally, Jake spoke. He accused me of rubbing it in his face, of being selfish. He slammed his napkin on the table and said, "You think you're better than me just because you stayed close? You think she loved you more?" His voice cracked like he didn't know whether to be angry or hurt. Then he stood up, his chair screeching against the floor, and yelled, "You can keep your stupid heirlooms. I don't care," before storming out of the dining room. The front door slammed so hard the candles flickered. For a long moment, no one moved. My mom finally broke the silence. She just sighed, shook her head, and said quietly, "Grandma made her choice." Jake never tried to know her. Uncle Dave didn't say anything. He just stared at his plate. The rest of dinner was awkward. People whispered. No one really ate much after that. And that was it. After that night, Jake hasn't spoken to me, to Anna, or even to Mom. He didn't come to Grandma's memorial service. He didn't call. He didn't text. He just disappeared from all of us. Weeks later, when the lawyer read Grandma's will, it was exactly as I'd said. Everything, her house, her jewelry, her vintage clock collection, her photo albums, went to me and Anna. She even wrote a letter explaining why. She said, "To my girls, who were there for me through everything. You kept me company, you made me proud, you loved me when I needed it most. I want you to have what I cherished, because you cherished me too." There wasn't a single mention of Jake, not one line, and it hurt to read that, not because I wanted him to get anything, but because I knew how final it felt. Grandma hadn't forgotten him. She just accepted he wasn't there for her. I didn't gloat. I didn't plan to humiliate Jake, but I also didn't lie. Grandma made her choice. She wanted her things to stay with the people who showed up. And if Jake feels left out, well, maybe it's because he left himself out. But I can't help thinking about him sometimes. Did I go too far? Should I have stayed quiet that night? Just smiled and changed the subject? Maybe if I hadn't said it so bluntly, we wouldn't have lost him completely. Or maybe the truth was always going to come out eventually. The thing is, I don't hate Jake. I never did. I just wish he'd tried harder, for Grandma's sake. I wish he'd seen how much she wanted him in her life. But he didn't. And now it's too late. So what do you think? Was I too harsh on Jake? Or did he deserve to hear the truth? Update 1. It's been about 3 weeks since Thanksgiving, and I honestly thought maybe things would cool down by now, but instead it feels like everything is just getting worse. After Jake stormed out that night, he completely ghosted all of us. At first, I thought he just needed some time to process what happened. I figured he was embarrassed, maybe even hurt, and I was willing to give him space. I didn't reach out, and neither did Anna. Mom told me to leave it alone. That Jake was an adult, and if he wanted to talk, he'd talk. But Uncle Dave? He wasn't as quiet. A few days after the dinner, he called my mom. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Mom told me later that Dave was furious. He said I had humiliated Jake in front of the entire family, that I'd rubbed the inheritance in his face like I was proud of it. Mom told him calmly that it wasn't like that Jake had brought it up first by accusing me and Anna of being Grandma's favorites. But Dave didn't want to hear it. He said, and I quote, "Melissa ruined Thanksgiving. She ruined Jake's memory of Mom." Mom tried to explain that Grandma made her own decisions, but Dave kept going on about how unfair it was. Apparently, Jake had been crying when he got home. That part shocked me. Crying? I couldn't even imagine Jake crying. He's always been the type to act like nothing bothers him. But apparently that night it did. The next week, I started getting weird messages from some of our distant relatives. People I hadn't talked to in years suddenly texted me things like, "Hey, I heard about what happened. Are you okay?" And, Jake's really upset, right?" I didn't know what to say to them. I just responded with, "Yeah, I'm fine. It's complicated." Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Jake's girlfriend, Emily. I barely know her, but she sent me this long text saying that Jake was heartbroken, that he felt like he never had a chance with Grandma, that he grew up feeling like an outsider in his own family. She said, "You could have been kinder. He already felt like he didn't belong, and you confirmed it for him in the worst way." I didn't even know how to respond. Was I supposed to apologize for the truth? For Grandma's choices? For the fact that he didn't bother to show up for her when she was alive? I typed out a few different replies and deleted them all. In the end, I just didn't respond. A few days later, Anna came over to my apartment. She brought coffee and pastries, like she always does when she wants to have a serious talk. She sat me down and said, "Melissa, we need to figure out what to do about Jake. Mom's worried. Uncle Dave is furious. And now half the family thinks you're some kind of villain." I told her I didn't care what they thought, that it wasn't my job to sugarcoat Grandma's wishes just to make Jake feel better. But Anna, being the peacemaker she always is, said maybe I should at least reach out. "You don't have to apologize," she said, "but maybe just explain. Let him know you didn't mean to hurt him." I didn't know if it would make a difference, but I agreed. I drafted a long message to Jake. I told him I was sorry if my words came out harsh that night, that I didn't mean to humiliate him. I explained that Grandma's choices had nothing to do with me, that I never asked for her to leave me anything. I told him I understood he felt left out, but that he needed to understand why Grandma felt the way she did. I even reminded him of all the times she tried to reach out to him, and how she still loved him despite the distance. I sent it. No response. Not a single word. Days went by. Nothing. Meanwhile, the lawyer handling Grandma's estate finalized the paperwork. Anna and I officially became the legal owners of everything. We went to Grandma's house together to start sorting through her things. It was bittersweet. The house still smelled like her perfume, like vanilla and lavender. Her clocks were still ticking softly in the living room. We sat on her old floral couch, going through her letters and photo albums, and I couldn't help but cry. It just hit me how much I missed her. While we were packing boxes, Anna found a small envelope addressed to Jake. It wasn't in the will. It was just tucked into one of Grandma's journals. Inside was a simple letter. It said, "Dear Jake, I hope one day you'll visit me more. I'd love to know you better. Love, Grandma." That broke me. She still wanted him in her life. Even after all the missed calls, the canceled visits, the excuses, she still hoped he'd come around. Anna and I just sat there in silence, holding that letter. I debated sending it to him, but then I thought, would it even matter now? Grandma was gone. He couldn't make it right anymore. I ended up slipping the letter back into the journal. I don't know if that was the right choice. The next family gathering is coming up. Uncle Dave is hosting a small dinner for New Year's. Mom says we should go, but I'm not sure. If Jake's there, will he ignore me? Will he yell at me again? Will the whole night turn into another disaster? Part of me doesn't even want to see him. But another part of me wonders if maybe, just maybe, there's still a chance to fix this. I don't know. I just know that every time I walk past Grandma's old clock in my living room, I feel this heavy mix of love and guilt and anger. I loved her so much, and I know she loved me. But now I'm left wondering if my honesty destroyed what little family I had left. Was it worth it? I don't have an answer yet. Update 2. New Year's came and went quietly, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like the tension in the family finally settled into something calmer. Mom convinced Anna and me to go to Uncle Dave's small dinner, and I went with the intention of just keeping my head down and being polite. When we arrived, it wasn't anything like Thanksgiving. It was low-key. No big decorations, no huge table, just a handful of us sitting around, talking softly. Jake was there, but he didn't look angry anymore. He looked tired. He greeted everyone with a small nod, and when his eyes met mine, there was this awkward pause, but not the explosive tension I had imagined. We sat down to eat, and for most of the meal, We just talked about normal things, work, plans for the new year, little memories of Grandma that didn't stir up any drama. Then, toward the end of dinner, Jake quietly said, "Melissa, can we talk?" We stepped into the kitchen while the others stayed in the dining room. He didn't raise his voice, didn't look like he was about to lash out. Instead, he just sighed and said, "I'm sorry for how I reacted on Thanksgiving. I shouldn't have put you on the spot like that." I was honestly stunned. I told him I was sorry too, for how blunt I had been. I explained again that Grandma's choices weren't meant to hurt him, that it wasn't about anyone being more loved. He nodded and said, "I know. Deep down, I know I wasn't around. I wish I had tried harder. I wish I'd been there more." There was a long pause before I told him about the letter Anna and I found in Grandma's journal. I said, "She still wanted to know you better, Jake. She never stopped hoping you'd come around." He closed his eyes for a moment, like he was holding back tears, and just whispered, "I wish I had more time with her." For the first time in a long while, it felt like we were on the same page, not blaming each other, not fighting, just quietly accepting what was. We went back to the table, and no one brought up the will or Thanksgiving again. The rest of the night was calm. We shared a toast to Grandma, remembered her favorite little quirks, and then went our separate ways. Things aren't magically fixed. Jake and I aren't suddenly close, and I doubt we ever will be. But the silence isn't so heavy anymore. He sent a couple of casual messages since then. Nothing deep, just small updates. And honestly, that's enough for me. I think we both realize there's no undoing the past, no changing what Grandma decided or how things played out. But we can at least move forward without more bitterness. I still miss Grandma every day, but I think she'd be happy knowing the family didn't completely fall apart after she was gone. So that's where it ends. No dramatic reunion, no big rift either. Just a quiet understanding and a little bit of peace.